Hey folks, welcome to our channel, where we dive deep into the past to uncover the stories that shaped our world. Today, we're taking you on an unforgettable journey through one of the most pivotal moments in Indian history, the rise and fall of the Gupta Empire, often referred to as the Golden Age of India. From its remarkable cultural and intellectual achievements to its sudden and dramatic collapse in the 6th century, this empire's story is both a tale of triumph and tragedy. We'll explore how invasions, internal strife, and a changing world order dismantled a once unified civilization. And we'll compare this fall to other great empires, such as Rome and Han China. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not just how the Gupta Empire fell, but why its legacy continues to shape India today. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the rich history of the Gupta Empire, a story of greatness and the inevitable cycles of rise and decline. The Gupta Empire, founded by Maharaja Sri Gupta in the early 4th century CE, became one of the most significant empires in Indian history. Chandragupta I, who succeeded Sri Gupta, expanded the empire through strategic marriages and military conquests. His reign set the stage for the empire's dominance under his son, Samudragupta, often referred to as the Napoleon of India. Samudragupta expanded the empire's territory from the northern plains of India to the southern Deccan Plateau, establishing Gupta rule over much of the Indian subcontinent. This expansion laid the foundation for a unified political system that encouraged cultural growth and intellectual exchange. Chandragupta II, also known as Vikramaditya, ascended to the throne in the late 4th century CE, solidifying the Gupta Empire's position as the preeminent power in India. During his reign, the Gupta Empire experienced a period of unparalleled prosperity, often referred to as the Golden Age of India. Chandragupta's diplomatic skills, coupled with military victories, particularly over the Shakas, led to the expansion of the empire. This period saw significant advancements in art, architecture, science, mathematics, and literature. The famous Chinese traveler, Faxian, visited India during this time and noted the prosperity of the empire. Gupta rulers promoted the development of Hinduism as the dominant religion while also embracing Buddhism and Jainism, reflecting the empire's cultural pluralism. The Gupta Empire's golden age witnessed remarkable achievements in various fields. The contributions of scholars such as Aryabhata in astronomy and mathematics were revolutionary. Aryabhata proposed that the Earth is round and rotates on its axis, a theory that was centuries ahead of its time. In mathematics, the concept of zero and the decimal system were developed during this period, shaping the future of global mathematics. In literature, Kalidasa's plays and poetry, especially his work Shakuntala, are regarded as some of the finest in Indian literature. Gupta architecture flourished as well, with grand temples and stupas being constructed, many of which still stand today. Despite its prosperity, the Gupta Empire began to show signs of weakening in the early 5th century CE, primarily due to the failure of the Gupta rulers to establish a strong system of succession. After Chandragupta II's death in 415 CE, the Gupta Empire was ruled by a series of weaker monarchs who lacked the military prowess and diplomatic acumen of their predecessors. Internal conflicts and the fragmentation of the empire into smaller regional kingdoms led to the weakening of central authority. These divisions made it easier for external forces to invade and weaken the empire. The invasions of the Huns, also known as the Hephthalites, played a pivotal role in the collapse of the Gupta Empire. In the 5th and 6th century CE, the Huns began a push into northern India from Central Asia. The Gupta Empire, already suffering from internal divisions, struggled to repel the Hunnic invasions. In 455 CE, the Huns invaded the Gupta heartland, capturing several important cities and weakening the empire's control over its northern territories. The Gupta Emperor Skandagupta fought valiantly against the Huns, but his death in 467 CE marked a significant turning point. The empire never fully recovered from this invasion, and the Huns continued their raids, further destabilizing the region. By the mid-6th century, the Gupta Empire had fractured into smaller, competing kingdoms. The loss of centralized control, coupled with the Hunnic invasions, led to the rise of local rulers who asserted their independence. The once powerful Gupta dynasty was reduced to a series of small kingdoms, each with its own ruler and territory. This fragmentation marked the beginning of the end for the Gupta Empire, as its former unity gave way to disarray and constant warfare among rival kingdoms. The northern and central parts of India were particularly affected, with smaller kingdoms constantly vying for power. After the death of Chandragupta, the Gupta Empire's political structure began to unravel further. The empire was left in the hands of his successors, many of whom were either weak or ineffective in maintaining the vast territories of the Gupta state. The succession of rulers after Chandragupta did not have the military or administrative capabilities to maintain control over the entire empire, leading to fragmentation. By the early 6th century, the Gupta Empire was significantly weakened and divided into several smaller kingdoms, each ruled by local dynasts who exercised considerable autonomy. The central authority of the Gupta rulers became increasingly ceremonial, and they were unable to project their power beyond their immediate territories. This loss of centralized power facilitated the decline of the Gupta Empire as a unified entity. One of the most significant factors contributing to the decline of the Gupta Empire was the Hunnic invasions. The Huns, a nomadic group from Central Asia, began invading India in the 5th century, and their relentless attacks devastated the Gupta territories. In the early 450 CE, the Huns, under their leader Toramana, began a series of devastating raids into northern India. The Huns targeted the rich and prosperous regions of the Gupta Empire, particularly the northern plains and the Indus Valley. The Huns' raids resulted in the destruction of several important cities and trade routes, significantly weakening the empire's economy. By 476 CE, Toramana had captured the city of Mathura, one of the most important Gupta capitals. His successor, Mihirakula, continued the campaign of destruction, further diminishing the Gupta's power. The Huns' invasions not only destabilized the empire politically, but also led to a significant decline in the cultural and economic vibrancy that had characterized the golden age of the Guptas. Following the invasions and the weakening of central authority, the once unified Gupta Empire began to splinter into smaller kingdoms. The northern and central regions of India, which had once been under Gupta control, were now fragmented into a patchwork of rival states. The Gupta Empire's heartland, which stretched across the fertile plains of the Ganges River, was no longer under the direct control of a single ruler. The Gupta Emperor's inability to maintain a cohesive administration allowed regional rulers to gain power. Local kings took advantage of the weakened state of the empire, carving out independent kingdoms from the Gupta's former territories. These smaller kingdoms often came into conflict with each other, further eroding the cohesion of the once great empire. This fragmentation also made it easier for invaders, both foreign and domestic, to gain a foothold in the region. As the Gupta Empire crumbled, several regional powers emerged in the former Gupta territories. One of the most notable of these was the Maitraka dynasty, which rose to prominence in the region of Gujarat, located in the western part of India. The Maitrakas were originally vassals of the Gupta Empire, but as the central authority of the Guptas weakened, they asserted their independence. Under the leadership of Maitraka rulers, such as Bashkarvarman, the Maitrakas built a powerful kingdom centered around the port city of Vallabhai. This kingdom flourished economically due to its strategic location on the western coast, which facilitated trade with the Mediterranean and Arabian regions. The Maitrakas, while not able to restore Gupta power, played a significant role in maintaining regional stability during the decline of the empire. Another important regional power that emerged during the fall of the Gupta Empire was the Pushyabhuti dynasty, which later became known as the Harsha dynasty. The founder of the dynasty, Pushyabhuti, established his rule in the region of Thanesar in present-day Haryana. His descendants, including the famous King Harsha, would go on to establish a powerful kingdom that briefly revived the idea of a unified northern India. Harsha, who ascended the throne in the early 7th century CE, was able to expand his kingdom through both military conquest and strategic alliances. Though Harsha's reign was relatively short, his empire was an important force in post-Gupta India. He was a patron of the arts, and under his rule, both Buddhism and Hinduism flourished. The rise of the Pushyabhuti dynasty, while a temporary revival of centralized power, showed that India was transitioning away from the Gupta model of centralized rule. In the south of India, the fall of the Gupta Empire saw the rise of new powers, such as the Chalukya dynasty. The Chalukyas emerged in the Deccan region, where they established a powerful kingdom in the 6th century CE. The Chalukya rulers, notably Pulakshin II, expanded their influence across large parts of the Deccan Plateau and into the Tamil-speaking regions of southern India. Their kingdom became a major rival to the Gupta remnants in the north and the expanding kingdoms of the south. The Chalukyas were known for their military prowess, and under Pulakshin II, they repelled several invasions from the north, including a notable conflict with the forces of Harsha. The rise of the Chalukya dynasty marked the beginning of a shift in power from the northern Gupta-dominated regions to the more decentralized southern kingdoms. The decline of the Gupta Empire had a significant impact on the cultural and intellectual life of India. Under the Guptas, the arts, literature, and science flourished, but as the empire weakened, so did the patronage that had supported these achievements. The Gupta rulers, particularly during the reign of Chandragupta II, have been strong patrons of the arts, supporting scholars, poets, and artists who created some of the most remarkable works of Indian culture. However, as the empire fragmented, the focus of regional rulers shifted to military concerns, and they were less able to support cultural endeavors. This led to a decline in the production of great literature, the building of temples, and the development of scientific knowledge. Though local artistic traditions continued, the empire-wide cohesion that had supported a flourishing of culture was gone, and the intellectual and cultural landscape of India began to shift. The Gupta period had seen significant advancements in science and mathematics, including the work of scholars like Aryabhata, who proposed groundbreaking theories about astronomy and mathematics. However, with the fall of the Gupta Empire and the disintegration of centralized authority, there was a notable decline in scientific achievements. Without the same level of support from a powerful central government, the work of great scientists like Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and Varahamihira slowed. Mathematics, astronomy, and other sciences took a back seat to political and military concerns as regional kingdoms focused primarily on survival rather than intellectual progress. The loss of the Gupta Empire also meant that the great centers of learning, such as Nalanda, began to lose their prominence in the broader intellectual world of India. Religion played a central role in the Gupta Empire, particularly in the promotion of Hinduism, which became the state religion. However, the decline of the Gupta Empire saw changes in the religious landscape of India. Hinduism, while still prominent, faced competition from both Buddhism and Jainism, which had been flourishing during the Gupta period. The rise of regional powers, such as the Maitrakas and the Chalukyas, also saw shifts in religious patronage, with different dynasties promoting different sects or religious practices. The rise of Buddhism in the north, under rulers like Harsha, and the growing influence of Shaivism and Vaishnavism in the south, contributed to a more diverse religious environment. This period marked a transition from the Gupta-era religious homogeneity to a more pluralistic and regional religious landscape. The decline of the Gupta Empire's military strength played a crucial role in its fall. The Gupta military was once one of the most formidable forces in India, thanks to the empire's centralized organization and strong leadership. However, by the 5th and 6th centuries, the Guptas had lost their ability to field large, well-equipped armies. Several factors contributed to this decline. First, the empire's vast territories were difficult to defend, and the central government lacked the resources to maintain a large standing army. The invasion of the Huns, which we discussed earlier, further depleted the Gupta military. The Guptas' inability to effectively mobilize their forces against invaders demonstrated the empire's growing military weakness. Additionally, the Gupta Empire was no longer able to provide sufficient funding and resources for the military, which led to the disbanding of many regional garrisons and the loss of control over the outer provinces. As the Gupta Empire fragmented, regional rulers began to establish military monarchies, each focused on expanding and defending their individual territories. These military monarchies had a very different political structure compared to the Gupta Empire, where centralized control was the norm. The decentralized military organizations of the post-Gupta period were often less effective at defending against external threats. While the Chalukya and Maitraka dynasties were able to assert power in the south and western India, the northern regions faced an increase in external invasions and internal warfare. In many cases, local military leaders became more focused on defending their own kingdoms from rival regional powers, which further weakened the collective defense of the Indian subcontinent. The rise of these smaller military kingdoms marked the end of large-scale, centralized control that had characterized the Gupta Empire. External invasions during the post-Gupta period played a significant role in hastening the decline of the empire. The Huns' repeated attacks were not the only threat the Gupta Empire faced. Several other groups began to invade India as well. The Iranian Sassanid Empire, though never able to conquer India fully, often disrupted trade and military alliances. Additionally, nomadic groups from Central Asia, including the White Huns, the Avars, and the Tocharians, began to pose increasing threats along the northern borders of the Indian subcontinent. These invasions were not only military challenges, but also led to economic disruptions, such as the destruction of trade routes and the loss of valuable resources. The Gupta Empire, already weakened by internal fragmentation, was unable to mount a successful defense against these various invaders. As these groups swept through India, they destabilized the entire region, leading to the collapse of Gupta power. The last known Gupta emperor, Vishnugupta, who ruled in the late 6th century, faced immense difficulties. By the time of his reign, the once mighty Gupta Empire had been reduced to a small region around the eastern part of India. Vishnugupta's empire was barely able to maintain its borders against external and internal pressures. The Huns had already made their mark in northern India, and the Gupta Empire had lost much of its former territory. Vishnugupta's reign saw no significant military victories or territorial gains, and the Gupta dynasty's once prominent status had long since faded. Ultimately, the last Gupta emperor was unable to prevent the final collapse of the dynasty. The decline was complete by the end of the 6th century CE, with the Gupta Empire ceasing to exist as a unified political entity. The empire's fall marked a significant shift in Indian history, from a golden age of cultural, scientific, and political unity to a period of regional fragmentation and instability. Despite the fall of the Gupta Empire, its legacy continued to influence India for centuries to come. The Gupta period had laid the foundations for many aspects of Indian culture that would endure long after the empire's collapse. In terms of science and mathematics, the Gupta Empire was responsible for some of the earliest developments in algebra, astronomy, and the concept of zero. These contributions were critical in shaping the development of mathematical thought in both the Islamic world and later in Europe. The Gupta period also saw the growth of Hinduism as a dominant religious force, laying the groundwork for the development of classical Hindu thought and practice. The legacy of Gupta art, literature, and philosophy continued to influence the Indian subcontinent long after the empire's demise. While the Gupta Empire itself did not survive, its cultural and intellectual contributions lived on in the kingdoms that succeeded it. After the fall of the Gupta Empire, India entered a period of political fragmentation. The unified empire was replaced by a patchwork of regional kingdoms, each with varying degrees of power and influence. These kingdoms often competed for control over strategic territories, leading to continuous warfare. While this fragmentation led to some local flourishing, such as the rise of the Chalukya and Maitraka dynasties, it also resulted in a lack of unity across the subcontinent. The loss of a central authority made India vulnerable to external invasions, and these smaller kingdoms often lacked the resources to effectively defend against invaders. The lack of political cohesion also meant that there was little coordination in terms of cultural, scientific, and religious developments. Nevertheless, many of the regional kingdoms that emerged after the fall of the Gupta Empire contributed to the cultural richness of the subcontinent in their own way. Following the fall of the Gupta Empire, the religious landscape of India also began to shift. Under the Gupta Empire, Hinduism had been promoted as the dominant religion, but after its decline, regional kingdoms adopted different religious policies based on their rulers' preferences. For example, while the Matrakas of Gujarat promoted both Hinduism and Buddhism, the Chalukyas and Pallavas in the south were more supportive of Shaivism and Vaishnavism. Buddhism, which had enjoyed imperial patronage under the Guptas, faced a decline in its influence during this period. However, it was still supported in some areas, especially in the north under rulers like Harsha. Jainism also continued to flourish in parts of western and southern India. This period saw a rise in regional religious identities, as local rulers often aligned themselves with particular sects, which shaped the course of Indian religious history for centuries. Despite the political fragmentation, the period following the fall of the Gupta Empire saw the continued importance of trade and cultural exchange across the Indian subcontinent and beyond. India's strategic position in the Indian Ocean allowed for the continuation of maritime trade with regions such as Southeast Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, and even as far as Africa and Europe. The decline of the Gupta Empire did not halt India's involvement in these trade networks. In fact, it may have increased the importance of regional ports and trade hubs. Cultural exchange through trade brought new ideas and goods to India, enriching local cultures. Furthermore, the resurgence of urban centers and trade routes allowed for the spread of Indian art, literature, and religious ideas throughout Asia. In the aftermath of the Gupta Empire's collapse, several regional powers began to rise in India. One of the most notable of these powers was the Vardhana dynasty, which would later become known as the Harsha dynasty. Founded by Pushyabhuti in the 6th century CE in northern India, the Vardhana dynasty initially ruled from the region of Thanesar in modern-day Haryana. Pushyabhuti's successor, Harsha, expanded his kingdom to cover much of northern India, from the Punjab to the Deccan Plateau. Harsha's reign marked a brief revival of centralized power in India. Though he was unable to restore the Gupta Empire's unity, his kingdom was the most significant power in northern India during the 7th century. Harsha was a patron of both Buddhism and Hinduism, reflecting the pluralistic religious climate of post-Gupta India. Under his rule, Harsha promoted peace, stability, and cultural flourishing, and he was one of the most famous Indian rulers of the period. Under Harsha's rule, the Vardhana dynasty became one of the most powerful kingdoms in post-Gupta India. Harsha not only focused on military expansion, but also on fostering cultural, intellectual, and religious activities. One of the major highlights of his reign was his patronage of Buddhism. Harsha provided significant support to Buddhist monastic institutions, and under his reign, the famous Chinese traveler Xuanzang visited India and stayed in Harsha's court for several years. The emperor's support for Buddhism is seen in his efforts to build monasteries, sponsor religious councils, and offer resources for the spread of Buddhist teachings. At the same time, Harsha also promoted Hinduism, reflecting the dual religious environment of India at the time. His reign is often regarded as a brief yet important period of religious tolerance and cultural exchange in a time of fragmentation. Despite the strength of his rule, Harsha's kingdom began to decline after his death in 647 CE. Harsha died without a successor, and the centralized power he had established quickly fragmented. His empire, like the Gupta Empire before it, fell into smaller, competing kingdoms. Following Harsha's death, northern India experienced political instability as regional powers once again took control. Harsha's attempts to unify India were ultimately unsuccessful, and the political fragmentation that had characterized the post-Gupta period returned. Although Harsha's kingdom was short-lived, his efforts to revive centralized power, promote religious pluralism, and support cultural endeavors left a lasting impact on India. His reign, while brief, serve as a reminder of the possibilities of Indian unity after the collapse of the Gupta Empire. Although the Gupta Empire had fallen by the 6th century, its legacy continued to influence the medieval kingdoms that arose in the centuries that followed. The Gupta Empire had established a model for centralized governance, and many subsequent rulers sought to emulate this system. Despite the fragmentation of the empire, the cultural and intellectual achievements of the Gupta period continued to shape Indian society. The Gupta-era development of mathematics, astronomy, and art had lasting effects on the intellectual and cultural landscapes of India. In particular, the concept of zero, developed during the Gupta period, would go on to have a profound influence on global mathematics. This intellectual legacy continued to influence the works of scholars in India, the Islamic world, and even Europe for centuries. The Gupta Empire had played a critical role in the development of classical Hinduism, and many of the religious and artistic traditions established during this period persisted long after the empire's collapse. The Gupta emperors were strong patrons of Hinduism, and they promoted the creation of monumental temples and the spread of religious ideas. After the fall of the empire, regional kingdoms continued to build on the Gupta architectural legacy. The style of Gupta temple architecture, with its intricately carved pillars and decorated sculptures, became the foundation for many of the religious buildings constructed by later Indian dynasties. Furthermore, the Gupta Empire's promotion of Hinduism helped solidify the religion's central role in Indian life. The Gupta-era emphasis on Hindu philosophy, particularly Vedanta and the development of the Puranas, had lasting impacts on the theological development of Hinduism in later centuries. The Gupta Empire also played a significant role in promoting Buddhism, particularly through its patronage of monasteries and religious texts. Although Buddhism saw a decline in India after the fall of the Gupta Empire, its influence did not disappear entirely. The post-Gupta kingdoms, especially under rulers like Harsha, continued to support Buddhist institutions and promote the religion. Harsha's patronage of Buddhism and his sponsorship of Buddhist scholars helped keep the faith alive in India. Furthermore, the Gupta period had been a time of significant development in Buddhist art and architecture, with the construction of stupas and the creation of intricate sculptures. These artistic traditions carried on long after the empire's collapse, influencing Buddhist art in countries such as Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and Tibet. Following the decline of the Gupta Empire and the failure of Harsha's efforts to re-establish centralized power, India entered a period of extensive regional fragmentation. The decline of the Gupta dynasty was followed by the rise of several regional kingdoms, the most notable of which were the Rajput kingdoms. The Rajputs, a warrior class from the northwestern regions of India, emerged as powerful rulers after the collapse of the Gupta Empire. These kingdoms were marked by a strong martial culture, and the Rajputs were known for their military prowess and their feudal system of governance. The Rajput kingdoms were frequently engaged in territorial disputes with each other, but they also defended India from foreign invasions, especially from the Arabs and later the Turks. The Rajput rulers built many forts, palaces, and temples, some of which remain important cultural sites in modern India. The Rajputs also became known for their patronage of the arts, particularly literature, music, and architecture. While regional kingdoms, such as the Rajputs, gained prominence after the Gupta Empire's fall, India also experienced the increasing influence of Islamic powers. From the 7th century onward, Muslim invaders from Central Asia began to make incursions into northern India. The first major Muslim invasion occurred in the 8th century under the Umayyad Caliphate, when Muhammad bin Qasim led an invasion of Sind. Though the invasion of Sind did not result in the immediate collapse of Indian society, it marked the beginning of a series of Islamic invasions that would shape the political and cultural landscape of India for centuries to come. The establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in the 12th century and the later Mughal Empire further accelerated the spread of Islam in India. The impact of Islamic rule will be felt in many aspects of Indian life, from architecture and culture to politics and religion. In southern India, the fall of the Gupta Empire and the ensuing fragmentation led to the rise of several powerful regional dynasties, one of the most significant being the Chola dynasty. The Cholas were based in the Tamil-speaking region of southern India and are known for their naval prowess, administrative efficiency, and cultural achievements. During the 9th to 13th centuries, the Cholas expanded their empire across the southern peninsula and even into Southeast Asia. Their influence reached as far as present-day Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. The Cholas are also renowned for their contributions to art and architecture, especially in the construction of large temple complexes such as the Brihadeeswarar Temple in Tanjavur. The Chola dynasty helped maintain the continuity of Indian culture in the south, even as northern India experienced more frequent invasions and political upheavals. The collapse of the Gupta Empire did not mark the end of India's cultural vibrancy, though it certainly shifted its focus. The post-Gupta period saw the rise of new artistic traditions, which, while building upon the Gupta legacy, also began to reflect the changing political, religious, and cultural landscape. Gupta art had been characterized by its refinement, with an emphasis on harmony and balance in sculptures, paintings, and architectural forms. The collapse of centralized power led to the decentralization of art production, with regional kingdoms promoting distinct styles. In the north, the Rajput and later the Mughal kingdoms encouraged the development of Hindu temple art, including the intricate carvings of gods and mythological scenes. In the south, the Chola dynasty built some of India's most renowned temple architecture, such as the Brihadeeswarar Temple, with grand sculptures and vivid frescoes that depicted religious stories. Furthermore, the spread of Buddhism into Central Asia and East Asia during this time influenced the iconography of Buddhist art. The Gandhara style, which had emerged under the Kushans, saw a fusion of Greco-Roman and Buddhist art traditions. This syncretism continued as Buddhist art moved eastward, influencing art in countries like China, Japan, and Korea. In southern India, the Chola rulers encouraged the development of bronze sculpture, and these masterpieces, such as the famous Nataraja, Lord Shiva as the cosmic dancer, became central to South Indian religious practices. The artistic traditions of this period represent a dynamic interaction between regional influences and the enduring legacy of Gupta art. During the decline of the Gupta Empire, regional kingdoms began to foster their own distinct literary traditions. In the south, the Tamil language and literature flourished, especially under the Chola and Pallava dynasties. Tamil literature saw the creation of devotional hymns known as the Thevaram and Tiravasagam, which are composed by saint poets like Appar and Sundarar. These works were significant not only for their religious content, but also for their artistic expression and their influence on the Bhakti movement, a devotional trend that emphasized personal worship and the establishment of a direct relationship with God. In the north, regional languages like Sanskrit, Prakrit, and even vernacular languages began to see greater use in literary works, even as the dominance of classical Sanskrit began to wane. The epic poetry and dramatic works that flourished during the Gupta period, such as the works of Kalidasa, continued to inspire regional authors and playwrights. In fact, the post-Gupta period saw the composition of some important literary works, including the Raghavamsa, an epic poem by Kalidasa, and the Prithviraj Raso, a historical epic about the Rajput king Prithviraj Chauhan, which blended historical themes with mythological elements. These literary achievements reflected a growing trend in Indian literature toward regionalism, with different kingdoms and linguistic traditions contributing their own unique perspectives and styles. Religious transformation continued after the fall of the Gupta Empire, with the rise of new devotional movements that shaped the religious fabric of India. The Bhakti movement, which had its roots in the early centuries of the Common Era, gained significant momentum after the Gupta period. Bhakti emphasized a personal and emotional connection with the divine, and it became a powerful force in the religious landscape of India. The Bhakti saints, including figures like Ramanuj, Kabir, and Mirabai, preached that individuals could attain spiritual liberation through love and devotion to a personal God, bypassing the need for ritual sacrifices or complex philosophical arguments. This devotional movement had an egalitarian quality, as it transcended the rigid caste system and emphasized the devotion of the heart over ritualistic practices. In the South, The Alvars and Nayanars, Tamil saints and poets, had already laid the foundations for Bhakti before the fall of the Gupta Empire. However, it was during the post-Gupta period, particularly in the 7th to 10th centuries, that Bhakti spread throughout India, especially in the north. As regional kingdoms took power, they also patronized Bhakti saints and poets, leading to a widespread popularization of devotional worship. Bhakti became an important part of the religious landscape in India, influencing both Hinduism and the development of Sikhism in the Punjab region. Even after the fall of the Gupta Empire, trade continued to play a central role in India's economy. India's strategic location between east and west made it a critical hub for trade, and this importance did not diminish after the Gupta collapse. The decline of the Gupta Empire, however, did lead to the weakening of some of the major trade routes. In the north, the disruption caused by the invasions of the Huns and the instability of the post-Gupta kingdoms led to the decline of overland trade. Nonetheless, the maritime trade routes continued to thrive. The western coastal region of India, including Gujarat and the Malabar coast, continued to serve as key points for maritime trade between India, the Arabian Peninsula, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The decline of the Gupta Empire also allowed new kingdoms and powers to take control of these trade routes. The Cholas, for example, expanded their naval power and established trade networks that reached as far as Southeast Asia, including the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. The rise of the Chola naval fleet made them a dominant power in the Indian Ocean and facilitated the spread of Indian culture, religion, and commerce across Southeast Asia. The Chola Empire's involvement in trade not only brought material wealth, but also fostered cultural exchanges that had long-lasting impacts on the region. This period saw the spread of Indian art, architecture, and religious practices, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, into Southeast Asia. While the Gupta Empire had been a significant player in the overland trade that passed through the Silk Road, its fall did not stop this important network of commerce. The Silk Road, which connected India to Central Asia, the Middle East, and China, continued to function as a vital trade route even after the collapse of the Gupta Empire. Indian merchants and traders remained integral to the Silk Road trade, particularly in the exchange of spices, textiles, and precious stones. Indian influence spread through Central Asia, and goods like Indian cotton, silk, and gemstones were highly sought after. Furthermore, Indian ideas in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were transmitted along the Silk Road to other civilizations. The influence of Buddhism, which had flourished during the Gupta period, continued to spread along these trade routes. The establishment of Buddhist monastic centers along the Silk Road, such as those in Central Asia and China, ensured that Indian religious and philosophical ideas continued to have an impact on the broader world. The transmission of ideas and goods along the Silk Road helped preserve and disseminate many of the cultural legacies of the Gupta Empire. Even as political power in India became more fragmented, the trade routes that connected India to Southeast Asia were crucial for the cultural exchanges that took place between the two regions. Following the collapse of the Gupta Empire, the rise of the Chola and Pallava dynasties in southern India ensured that India's influence continued to spread across Southeast Asia. Indian traders, sailors, and scholars traveled to Southeast Asia, bringing with them Indian religious practices, art, and architecture. The spread of Hinduism and Buddhism had a profound impact on the cultural development of Southeast Asia, particularly in places like Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia. One of the most significant examples of this cultural exchange is the construction of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The temple, which was originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, was built in the early 12th century, long after the Gupta Empire's fall. However, it was deeply influenced by Indian architectural styles, and its construction reflects the enduring impact of Indian culture in Southeast Asia. Indian mythology and religious practices also permeated Southeast Asian societies, with Hindu epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata being adapted into local cultures. These cultural exchanges, facilitated by trade, would continue to shape the region's religious, artistic, and cultural development for centuries. The cultural and religious impact of India, particularly in terms of Hinduism and Buddhism, spread widely across Southeast Asia following the decline of the Gupta Empire. Indian merchants, monks, and traders traveled to regions like Southeast Asia, bringing with them not only goods, but also religious ideologies and cultural practices. The influence of Hinduism was particularly strong in Southeast Asia, where kingdoms such as Srivijaya in modern-day Indonesia, Cambodia, and Kampa in Vietnam adopted Indian religious practices. Hindu temples, similar to those found in India, were built in Southeast Asia during this period, and Indian epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata were integrated into the cultures of these regions. The legacy of Hinduism in Southeast Asia was profound, with major empires such as the Khmer Empire in Cambodia incorporating Hindu deities and rituals into their royal culture. The temple complex of Angkor Wat, initially built as a Hindu temple, is one of the most enduring symbols of Indian religious influence in the region. Buddhism, too, played a major role in the cultural exchange between India and Southeast Asia. Buddhist missionaries traveled along the maritime trade routes that connected India to Southeast Asia, spreading the teachings of the Buddha and establishing monastic centers. The spread of Buddhism helped shape the religious landscape of Southeast Asia, where it took root in countries like Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. In countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand, Indian influence through the spread of Buddhism helped solidify religious practices that continue to dominate the region today. The transmission of Buddhist art, architecture, and monastic traditions significantly impacted the cultural development of Southeast Asia, leaving behind lasting monuments such as the famous Borobudur Temple in Indonesia. The architectural styles that developed during and after the Gupta Empire continued to evolve as a result of India's rich cultural and religious heritage. The Gupta period had seen the emergence of classical Indian architecture, with the construction of large temples and intricate sculptures, many of which still stand as testaments to the period's grandeur. After the fall of the Gupta Empire, regional kingdoms like the Cholas in the south continued to build on this legacy, with their own distinctive style of architecture. The Chola dynasty, in particular, is renowned for its monumental temples, such as the Brihadeeswarar Temple in Tanjavur, which exemplify the grandeur of Indian temple architecture. These temples were not only places of worship, but also acted as centers for cultural expression, with their intricate carvings and sculptures depicting Hindu gods, mythological scenes, and daily life. The Gupta architectural influence also extended beyond India's borders, especially to Southeast Asia. The Hindu and Buddhist temples in Southeast Asia, including those in Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia, often mirrored the architectural features seen in Indian temples. For instance, the temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia was built in the Khmer style, but was deeply influenced by Indian architectural techniques, particularly those used in South Indian temple building. This cultural diffusion, facilitated by trade and religious missions, allowed Indian architectural traditions to influence the development of monumental religious buildings across Asia. Over time, these Indian-inspired architectural styles merged with local traditions, resulting in the development of unique regional forms of temple architecture that retain the essence of their Indian origins. Indian literature, particularly in the form of epic poetry, also spread across Southeast Asia, significantly influencing the literary traditions of the region. The Ramayana and Mahabharata, two of the most important epics in Indian literature, were adapted into Southeast Asian cultures, where they became central to the region's literary and artistic heritage. In Southeast Asia, the Ramayana was not only recited as a religious text, but also performed as theatrical plays and depicted in temple art. The Mahabharata, with its stories of heroism, fate, and family, resonated deeply with the Southeast Asian audience and was often reinterpreted in local languages and settings. In Indonesia, the Ramayana was adapted into the traditional shadow puppet theater known as wayang kulit, a form of entertainment that became one of the most significant cultural expressions of Southeast Asia. The wayang kulit performances, which use intricately carved leather puppets to tell stories from Hindu epics, became a popular form of storytelling in Java, Bali, and other parts of Indonesia. The influence of these epics extended beyond Southeast Asia to Central Asia, where Indian literature was incorporated into the region's poetic traditions. Indian literature's impact on Southeast Asia's literary scene continued for centuries, with local adaptations and performances being passed down through generations. Following the decline of the Gupta Empire, one of the most significant political and military forces to emerge in northern India were the Rajputs, a group of warrior clans who rose to prominence during the post-Gupta period. The Rajputs were known for their military prowess and their fierce defense of their kingdoms. The Rajputs took advantage of the power vacuum left by the fall of the Gupta Empire to carve out their own territories in northern India. These kingdoms, such as Mewar, Mervar, and Rajputana, were characterized by strong fortifications, heroic warrior traditions, and a feudal political structure. Rajput rulers were often independent, but they were also bound by alliances and rivalries with other regional powers. The Rajput kingdoms were also known for their contributions to Indian art, particularly in the form of architectural wonders. The Rajputs built impressive forts and palaces, many of which are still standing today as important cultural and tourist landmarks. These structures, such as the forts of Chittorgarh and Marangar, were designed to withstand sieges and attacks, reflecting the Rajput emphasis on military strength. The Rajputs were also great patrons of the arts, and their courts became centers of culture, literature, and music. Though their kingdoms often fragmented due to internal strife and external invasions, the Rajputs played a critical role in shaping the political landscape of medieval India. In addition to the rise of the Rajputs, another significant power emerged in northern India after the fall of the Gupta Empire, the Pushyabhoti dynasty, which would later become known as the Harsha dynasty. This dynasty is best known for its most famous ruler, King Harsha, who reigned from 606 CE to 647 CE. Harsha came to power in the region of Thanesar, in present-day Haryana, and through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic alliances, he expanded his kingdom to cover a large portion of northern India, including the Gangetic Plains. Harsha's reign marked a brief period of political unity in the post-Gupta era, as he managed to consolidate a large portion of northern India under his control. Harsha is also remembered for his patronage of Buddhism and Hinduism. Despite being a strong Hindu ruler, he supported the spread of Buddhism and maintained cordial relations with Buddhist monks. His court became a center for cultural and intellectual exchange, and his patronage helped foster the flourishing of Indian literature and art during his reign. Harsha's legacy is also important for his interactions with foreign travelers, including the Chinese monk Xuanzang, who visited India during Harsha's rule. Xuanzang's detailed account of India during Harsha's reign provides valuable insights into the political and cultural climate of the time. However, after Harsha's death, his empire fragmented and fell into regional divisions once again, marking the end of centralized power in northern India. While the Rajput kingdoms and the Harsha dynasty represented the continuation of indigenous Indian powers, the 7th century also witnessed the first significant Islamic incursions into India. These invasions would change the political and cultural dynamics of India for centuries. The first major Muslim invasion of India came in the early 8th century, with the Umayyad Caliphate's invasion of Sindh in 711 CE under the leadership of Muhammad bin Qasim. Although the Muslim forces were not able to expand much beyond Sindh at this time, the invasion marked the beginning of a series of Muslim invasions that would ultimately lead to the establishment of Muslim rule in India. The impact of these early Islamic invasions was twofold. Politically, they weakened the region's established Hindu kingdoms, while culturally, they introduced new architectural styles, religious practices, and administrative systems. The Muslim presence in India would ultimately lead to the rise of the Delhi Sultanate in the 13th century, and later the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, both of which had a profound impact on India's history, culture, and society. Though the Gupta Empire's decline set the stage for the fragmentation of India, it also paved the way for the introduction of new cultural and political influences that would shape the subcontinent's future. The fall of the Gupta Empire in the 6th century deeply disrupted the social fabric of the Indian subcontinent. During the Gupta Golden Age, society had enjoyed relative stability, economic prosperity, and cultural harmony. Villages functioned smoothly under local administrators, trade networks connected distant regions, and cities thrived as centers of learning and craftsmanship. However, once the centralized authority of the Guptas weakened, this balance collapsed. Continuous invasions by the Huns devastated towns, agricultural lands, and trade routes. Farmers fled their villages due to insecurity, leading to declining agricultural output and food shortages. The collapse of revenue systems meant that local officials could no longer maintain irrigation works, roads, or public infrastructure. Social mobility also declined during this period. Under strong Gupta rule, talent in administration, scholarship, and military service could elevate individuals regardless of birth. After the collapse, power became localized and hereditary. Warrior elites dominated politics, and common people found themselves increasingly tied to landowners or local rulers for protection. Law and justice, once administered through imperial courts, now depended on local customs and the authority of regional kings. This fragmentation increased inequality and insecurity. The decline of cities also meant fewer opportunities for artisans and merchants, pushing many into rural dependency. Thus, the fall of the Gupta Empire marked a major transition from an organized imperial society to a fractured and uncertain social order. One of the most profound long-term consequences of the Gupta collapse was the increasing rigidity of the caste system. During the Gupta period, although caste divisions existed, they were relatively flexible compared to later centuries. Education, administrative roles, and religious activities were not entirely restricted by birth. However, as political authority weakened, local rulers and Brahmin elites sought stability by reinforcing rigid social hierarchies. Land grants to Brahmins increased dramatically during the post-Gupta period, granting them economic power and social authority. These Brahmins codified social norms through religious texts, reinforcing the idea that social order was divinely ordained. The caste system became more hereditary and restrictive, limiting mobility between social groups. Occupational roles became fixed, and social interaction between castes was increasingly regulated. This rigidity served the interests of regional rulers, who relied on Brahmin support to legitimize their authority. In return, Brahmins gained privileges, tax exemptions, and control over villages. While this system provided local stability, it also deepened social inequality. Lower castes and tribal groups were marginalized, often excluded from economic and religious opportunities. Over time, these rigid caste divisions became deeply embedded in Indian society, shaping social relations for centuries. Thus, the political collapse of the Gupta Empire indirectly contributed to the entrenchment of one of India's most enduring social structures. Urban life, which had flourished during the Gupta Golden Age, suffered greatly after the empire's fall. Cities like Pataliputra, once vibrant centers of administration, trade, and learning, declined rapidly. Continuous warfare and economic instability made cities unsafe and unattractive. Merchants lost access to long-distance trade routes, craftsmen lost patronage, and scholars lost institutional support. As urban centers declined, education also suffered. Large universities and learning centers depended on royal patronage and stable economies. Without imperial funding, many institutions struggled to survive. Although Nalanda University continued for several centuries, many smaller schools and academies disappeared. The decline of urban education meant fewer opportunities for scientific research, philosophical debate, and literary creation. Knowledge transmission became increasingly limited to religious institutions, particularly temples and monasteries. While this preserved religious learning, secular education in fields like mathematics, astronomy, and medicine slowed. The intellectual dynamism that defined the Gupta era faded. This decline in urban culture marked a significant shift in Indian civilization, moving it away from cosmopolitan scholarship toward localized and religiously centered learning. Historians often describe the fall of the Gupta Empire as the end of India's classical age. This period had been defined by political unity, cultural brilliance, scientific innovation, and economic prosperity. The collapse shattered this unity, ushering in a long era of regionalism. Unlike China or Rome, India did not immediately reunify under a strong, centralized empire. Instead, power fragmented among dozens of kingdoms, each with its own culture, language, and political system. While this diversity enriched Indian civilization, it also weakened collective defense and coordination. The end of the classical age did not mean cultural death, but rather transformation. Artistic styles became regional, religious practices diversified, and political authority localized. However, the scale and ambition of Gupta achievements were rarely matched again until much later. The Gupta Empire's collapse became a historical dividing line, separating ancient India from the medieval period. This transition shaped India's future political trajectory, making it more vulnerable to external invasions and internal conflicts. The memory of Gupta unity would later inspire rulers like Harsha and the Mughals to attempt reunification, showing how deeply the Gupta legacy remained embedded in Indian consciousness. The fall of the Gupta Empire offers critical lessons about the nature of power and governance. One major lesson is the danger of over-reliance on strong individuals rather than institutions. Gupta prosperity depended heavily on capable rulers like Samudragupta and Chandragupta II. When weaker successors took power, the system lacked safeguards to maintain stability. Another lesson is the importance of military adaptation. The Gupta army, once dominant, failed to modernize in response to new threats like the Huns. This inability to adapt left the empire vulnerable to invasion. Economic lessons are equally important. The Guptas relied heavily on land revenue and trade. When invasions disrupted agriculture and commerce, the state collapsed rapidly. The decline shows how economic resilience is essential for political survival. Finally, the Gupta fall highlights the importance of unity in the face of external threats. Fragmentation allowed invaders to exploit divisions. These lessons would echo throughout Indian history, influencing later rulers and shaping strategies of governance, defense, and administration. Despite its fall, the Gupta Empire's legacy never disappeared. Its contributions to mathematics, science, art, and philosophy continued to shape India and the world. The decimal system and the concept of zero revolutionized global mathematics. Gupta artistic ideals influenced temple architecture for centuries. Hindu religious practices formalized during the Gupta-era became central to Indian identity. Even political ideas of righteous kingship and dharma-based rule trace their roots to Gupta governance. Later, empires looked back to the Gupta age as a model of ideal rule. Medieval Indian kings sought legitimacy by linking themselves to Gupta traditions. In modern India, historians still refer to the Gupta period as a benchmark of cultural excellence. The fall of the Gupta Empire was not an end, but a transformation. Its decline reshaped India, setting the stage for medieval kingdoms, religious movements, and global interactions. In this way, the Gupta Empire, even in collapse, continued to shape history long after its political power vanished. The fall of the Gupta Empire is often compared to the decline of other great empires in world history, particularly the Roman Empire and Han China. Each of these empires experienced a similar set of circumstances that led to their eventual fragmentation: internal strife, weak successors, economic instability, and external invasions. However, the political collapse of each empire unfolded differently, shaped by unique cultural, geographic, and economic factors. The Gupta Empire, like Rome and Han China, had reached the height of its power and prosperity during its golden age. The Gupta rulers maintained a centralized bureaucracy, vast trade networks, and a flourishing cultural and intellectual environment. However, similar to the Roman Empire's experience, the Guptas faced internal power struggles and a lack of strong successors. When capable leaders like Chandragupta II and Samudragupta passed away, weaker rulers took the throne, which led to political fragmentation. Furthermore, the Gupta Empire relied heavily on military defense and trade, both of which suffered due to invasions from the Huns and economic disruptions, much like the weakening of Rome's borders in Europe or the collapse of the Han dynasty's control over the Silk Road. In Rome, economic issues, along with internal conflicts and external threats from barbarian invasions, led to the empire's eventual division. Rome also suffered from a lack of effective leadership, with many emperors coming to power through military means rather than inheritance, and frequently being overthrown or assassinated. Similarly, the Han Empire suffered from peasant revolts, corruption, and external invaders like the Xiongnu. Like the Guptas, the Han dynasty saw a weakening of its centralized control and a decline in agricultural productivity, which left it vulnerable to invasions and internal collapse. What distinguishes the Gupta decline from Rome and Han, however, is that India remained culturally and religiously intact, despite political fragmentation. While the Roman Empire's collapse ushered in the chaotic and fragmented Middle Ages in Europe, and Han China entered a period of division known as the Three Kingdoms period, India experienced a continuity of religious practices, cultural exchange, and trade despite its fragmentation. Regional powers like the Chalukyas and Rajputs arose after the Gupta decline, which allowed the Indian subcontinent to retain its cultural unity and vibrancy. In contrast, Europe saw a dark age following the fall of Rome, while China went through a tumultuous phase of warfare and power struggles. The role of invasions in the decline of the Gupta Empire, much like Rome and Han China, underscores how external threats can significantly contribute to the downfall of great powers. The Huns, a nomadic group from Central Asia, were one of the most formidable forces in the Gupta Empire's decline. Their invasions destabilized the region, causing immense damage to infrastructure and economies. The Guptas' inability to fully defend their borders left the empire vulnerable, and this contributed to their eventual fragmentation. The Romans, too, faced invasions from barbarian groups such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns, who overwhelmed the Western Roman Empire. The fall of Rome in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, marked the end of centralized control in Western Europe. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, persisted for a while longer but faced similar problems with external invasions, particularly from the Seljuk Turks, Normans, and eventually the Ottoman Turks. In Han China, the Xiongnu and other nomadic groups from the steppes also posed a significant threat to Chinese stability. The Han Empire, like the Gupta, had initially dealt with such invaders through diplomacy and military strength. However, the empire's borders began to weaken over time, and these incursions ultimately led to the collapse of the Han dynasty. While the Gupta Empire fell under the pressure of both internal instability and the Huns, the fall of the Roman Empire and Han China can also be attributed to similar vulnerabilities in defense, economy, and leadership. However, it's important to note that the way these empires responded to these invasions varied. The Gupta Empire's collapse due to the Huns marked the beginning of a new political landscape in India, with regional powers emerging to fill the void left by the empire. In contrast, the Roman Empire struggled with a fragmented political structure that couldn't respond effectively to the barbarian invasions, and Han China's inability to maintain cohesion led to a period of division and warfare. After the collapse of the Gupta Empire, India experienced a period of regional fragmentation. While this process of decentralization and the rise of new regional powers was comparable to the post-Roman and post-Han periods, the aftermath of Gupta fragmentation was distinctly different in terms of cultural continuity. Unlike the fragmentation of the Roman Empire, which led to a period of cultural decline in Europe, or the chaos following the fall of the Han dynasty, which ushered in the Three Kingdoms period of civil war in China, India retained its cultural coherence despite the political decentralization. The rise of regional kingdoms in India, such as the Chalukyas, Maitrakas, and the later Rajput kingdoms, contributed to a rich mosaic of regional identities and governance styles. The cultural and intellectual achievements of the Gupta period, such as advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and literature, remained influential in these new kingdoms. Scholars continued to engage with Gupta-era ideas, and regional courts became centers for artistic and literary patronage. This ensured that, even as the political landscape shifted, India's cultural heritage remained intact and even flourished in new forms. In contrast, the fall of the Roman Empire in the West led to the decline of urban life, educational institutions, and intellectual exchange, as Europe entered a period of feudalism and relative isolation. Similarly, after the collapse of the Han dynasty, China was divided into competing kingdoms, and it took several centuries for the country to reunify under the Sui and Tang dynasties. Though both Rome and Han China experienced a significant cultural setback after their respective collapses, India retained more of its intellectual and cultural identity due to the persistence of Hinduism, Buddhism, and local artistic traditions. One of the most striking aspects of the post-Gupta period is how long it took for India to reunify under a single, strong empire. Unlike China, which experienced relatively quick reunification under the Sui dynasty after the fall of the Han, or the Roman Empire's reunification under the Byzantine Empire, India experienced a prolonged period of political fragmentation following the Gupta collapse. This fragmentation lasted for centuries, and the reason for this lies in India's diverse geography, the rise of local rulers, and the complexity of its political systems. India's diverse geography played a significant role in preventing reunification. The vast subcontinent, with its mountain ranges, rivers, and dense forests, posed significant logistical challenges for the establishment of a centralized government. Unlike China, where the Great Wall and the Central Plains provided natural boundaries for a unified state, India's borders were more fluid, and the lack of natural barriers made it easier for regional powers to assert independence. Moreover, the political system in India had evolved to accommodate local autonomy. The Gupta Empire had been a model of centralized governance, but after its fall, local rulers and regional kings became more entrenched. These local powers were often supported by the rural population, who found regional rulers more accessible than distant imperial authorities. This created a system where regionalism took precedence over nationalism, making the concept of a unified Indian state less appealing. While India had powerful kingdoms during this period, such as Harsha's brief empire and the Chola dynasty in the south, none of them managed to establish lasting central authority over the entire subcontinent. The Rajput kingdoms, although militarily strong and strategically positioned, were often engaged in internal conflicts and unable to establish a cohesive India-wide system of governance. External invasions also played a crucial role in hindering India's reunification. After the fall of the Gupta Empire, India faced repeated incursions by nomadic groups, such as the Huns, Turks, and later, the Mongols. These invasions disrupted trade routes, weakened central authority, and left the subcontinent politically divided. The invasions further entrenched regionalism, as local kingdoms often focused on defense rather than unification. For example, after the Huns invaded northern India, the Rajput kingdoms became more concerned with defending their territories from foreign incursions, which distracted them from efforts at creating a unified empire. The arrival of Islam in the early medieval period also contributed to this lack of unity. The establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in the 13th century, followed by the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, created new political dynamics. While the Mughals did manage to unite large portions of India under a single empire, their reign was not a seamless continuation of India's pre-Islamic political structures. The Mughal Empire, though powerful, was constantly challenged by regional kingdoms, local uprisings, and the enduring legacy of regionalism that had taken root after the Gupta collapse. India's prolonged period of political fragmentation after the Gupta collapse had far-reaching effects on its history. The lack of political unity meant that regionalism became deeply embedded in the Indian psyche. It also delayed the formation of a truly unified Indian nation-state, a process that would take centuries to accomplish. The Rajput, Chola, and Mughal empires, while powerful in their own right, never managed to create the kind of political cohesion that China or Europe experienced after their respective collapses. This regionalism also led to a more diverse cultural landscape. While India remained united by its religious traditions, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, local customs, languages, and practices flourished, creating a rich tapestry of regional cultures. This diversity, while a source of strength and creativity, also meant that the idea of a single, unified India remained elusive for much of its history. The long-lasting fragmentation also meant that India's development was often shaped by the interests and concerns of local rulers, rather than the centralized vision that characterized earlier empires. As a result, India developed a unique political and cultural identity that was distinct from its neighbors, including China, Persia, and the Middle East. While the Gupta Empire's collapse heralded a period of fragmentation in India, it also coincided with the rise of Islamic powers in the Middle East. From the 7th century onward, the spread of Islam and the expansion of Islamic empires began to significantly influence the Indian subcontinent. The first significant Muslim incursion into India occurred in the early 8th century with the Umayyad Caliphate's conquest of Sindh. Led by the general Muhammad bin Qasim, the Umayyads established a foothold in the northwestern region of India, which would become a point of contact between the Islamic world and Indian civilization for centuries to come. Although the Umayyads did not extend their rule beyond Sindh, their presence set the stage for future Muslim invasions into India. These invasions were not just military in nature, but also had profound cultural, religious, and political consequences. For instance, the introduction of Islam began the spread of Islamic culture, art, and architecture in the subcontinent. The initial resistance of local rulers, like those in Rajputana, to the spread of Islam resulted in prolonged military campaigns that shaped the political landscape of medieval India. Over time, Islam began to merge with Indian cultural traditions, leading to the development of unique regional forms of Islamic art, architecture, and thought. However, the arrival of Islam was not a smooth process. Early Muslim rulers faced strong opposition from the local Hindu population, who viewed the invaders as foreign oppressors. The introduction of new Islamic rule created tensions that would echo throughout India's medieval history. The imposition of Islamic governance, including the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in the 12th century, marked the beginning of a new phase in India's history, one where religious and political divisions would shape the subcontinent for centuries. The establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in 1206 marked a significant turning point in the history of medieval India. After several waves of Islamic invasions, the Turks, under Muhammad Ghuri, succeeded in establishing a stable Muslim presence in northern India, which culminated in the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate. This new power structure was characterized by a series of Muslim dynasties that ruled much of India, including the Mamluks, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, and Lodis. The Delhi Sultanate became the first significant Islamic empire in India, and it laid the groundwork for the subsequent establishment of the Mughal Empire in the 16th century. One of the most significant contributions of the Delhi Sultanate to Indian history was the creation of a centralized administrative system that brought much of the northern Indian subcontinent under a single political entity. While the Delhi Sultanate's reign was marked by internal strife, external invasions, and frequent revolts from local rulers, it played a crucial role in integrating India into the wider Islamic world. The Sultanate's rulers were able to establish political legitimacy through a combination of military conquest and religious influence, though they were often faced with resistance from local Hindu rulers and the local population. Under the Delhi Sultanate, India experienced significant cultural changes. The introduction of Islamic architecture, including the construction of mosques, tombs, and the famous Qutb Minar, reshaped the Indian landscape. Islamic culture also began to influence Indian literature, philosophy, and the arts, with the development of Urdu as a language blending Persian, Arabic, and local languages. Despite this, Hinduism remained dominant in much of India, leading to a complex relationship between Hindu and Muslim rulers and the persistence of local traditions amidst foreign influence. The Delhi Sultanate's political and military struggles, however, were compounded by frequent invasions, including the Mongol invasions of the 13th and 14th centuries. The inability to fully unify India under one centralized rule during this period ensured that the Delhi Sultanate's rule would be one of constant political turbulence and territorial conflict. Nonetheless, it played an important role in laying the foundations for the later Mughal Empire, which would further consolidate Islamic power in India. The centuries of Islamic rule in India, which began with the Delhi Sultanate and continued through the Mughal Empire, created a lasting cultural synthesis that would significantly shape Indian society. The influence of Persian language, art, and architecture merged with India's indigenous traditions, resulting in a distinctive Indo-Islamic culture that would leave an indelible mark on Indian history. One of the most remarkable aspects of this synthesis was the development of new forms of art and architecture. Mughal architecture, for example, blended Persian, Central Asian, and Indian styles, producing iconic monuments like the Taj Mahal, which remain symbols of India's rich and diverse cultural heritage. This period also saw the rise of new forms of literature, particularly in the form of poetry, which combined Persian and local Indian traditions. Poets like Mirza Ghalib and Amir Khusro became famous for their works that reflected the synthesis of Islamic and Indian thought. Khusro, in particular, is remembered for his contributions to both Persian and Hindi literature, creating poetry that resonated with both Muslim and Hindu audiences. His works highlighted the complex and intertwined relationship between the two communities in India. In addition to literature, the Mughal period saw the flourishing of miniature painting, which fused Persian artistic techniques with Indian themes and subjects. These miniature paintings often depicted scenes from the Mughal court, religious events, and everyday life, blending Islamic artistic traditions with the rich visual culture of India. Mughal rulers were also known for their patronage of the arts and sciences, which led to a period of intellectual flourishing, with the construction of observatories, the compilation of astronomical texts, and the development of medical and mathematical knowledge. Despite the fact that India remained a land of diverse cultures and religions, the period of Islamic rule played a crucial role in shaping India's religious, cultural, and artistic legacy. However, the relationship between Muslims and Hindus in India was often marked by tension and conflict. The imposition of Islamic rule, particularly under the Delhi Sultanate and the later Mughal emperors, led to frequent clashes between the two religious communities. While the Mughals are often celebrated for their policies of religious tolerance, many of the sultans and emperors engaged in forced conversions and the destruction of temples, which left a legacy of religious division. Despite these tensions, India's ability to maintain a pluralistic society where Hindu and Muslim communities coexisted continued to be a hallmark of Indian civilization. The rise of the Mughal Empire in the early 16th century marked the beginning of a new era in Indian history. Founded by Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, the Mughal Empire would eventually come to control most of the Indian subcontinent, unifying the regions that had been fragmented since the fall of the Gupta Empire. Babur's victory at the Battle of Panipat in 1526 established the Mughal dynasty as a formidable force in India. His grandson, Akbar the Great, would further consolidate Mughal power, transforming the Mughal Empire into one of the most powerful and influential empires in world history. Unlike previous Islamic rulers in India, Akbar sought to create a more inclusive and tolerant empire. He implemented policies that promoted religious tolerance and encouraged dialogue between Hindus and Muslims. His marriage to Rajput princesses and his efforts to integrate Hindu elites into the Mughal administration helped to solidify his rule. Akbar's policies of religious and cultural tolerance, which included the abolition of the jizya tax on non-Muslims and the promotion of Hindi alongside Persian, allowed him to build a strong, multi-ethnic empire that was both Islamic and Indian in character. Under Akbar and his successors, the Mughal Empire saw a period of political stability and economic prosperity. The empire's centralized administration, efficient taxation system, and vast trade networks allowed for the growth of a thriving economy. The Mughal rulers also invested heavily in infrastructure, including the construction of roads, canals, and public buildings. The Mughal Empire became a major player in global trade, exporting goods such as textiles, spices, and precious stones. However, despite the empire's success in consolidating power, the later Mughal emperors faced challenges that ultimately led to the empire's decline. The weakening of central authority, combined with external invasions and internal rebellions, eventually resulted in the fragmentation of the Mughal Empire. Yet, the Mughal period remains a defining chapter in India's history, leaving behind a legacy of architectural wonders, cultural fusion, and religious tolerance that continues to shape India today. And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into the fall of the Gupta Empire. As we've seen, the story of the Gupta Empire is not just about the end of one great civilization. It's a lesson on the fragility of power, the importance of strong leadership, and the impact of cultural legacy. While the empire itself collapsed under internal strife and external invasions, its intellectual and cultural contributions continue to shape India and the world. The moral of this history: every empire faces challenges, and even the greatest civilizations can fall, but their ideas, art, and culture can live on, influencing future generations. Today, we've learned about the rise and fall of one of history's most influential empires. But this is just one chapter in the story of the world. Stay tuned for more historical explorations on this channel. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's journey into the past, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Gupta Empire's legacy and what you found most fascinating about today's episode. Until next time, keep exploring history, because understanding the past can guide us to a better future.